Well, there's a new leader at the top of the Minnesota Timber Producers Association and its sister organization, Minnesota Forest Industries. They play a vital role advocating for 32,000 men and women who make a living in Minnesota's woods. Joining us now to talk about his new job and the state of the industry is Mike Birkeland, Executive Vice President of the Timber Producers at Minnesota Forest Industries. Mike, thanks so much for coming tonight. Tell us a little bit about why you wanted the job, how you got the job. You've kind of come full circle. You've been involved in the forest industry in the past.
Yes, a number of years ago, actually about 25 years ago, I worked in the forest products industry, worked for Potlatch Corporation. And was based out of Cloquet at that time. Of course, originally started in the media prior to all of that, and really enjoyed those years in the industry. In the 1990s, there was a lot of growth in the industry and some wonderful opportunities, and went to work for a period of time in between there for almost 2 decades, working for rural electric cooperatives. So I've been working around rural industry, rural communities, really my entire career, and this industry is really kind of still close to my soul. I grew up in northern Minnesota, right along the Canadian border, the Rainy River, near Baudette, and my grandfather used to cut wood. He hauled timber, and so I guess it's a little bit in the family blood, the family genes, if you will. And having worked in the industry myself, I'm hoping I can come back and work with so many good people, men and women who work in the woods and in the mills. And hopefully we can all collectively make a difference for an industry that's vital in the state.
Now there are 2 distinct organizations, yes. Minnesota Forest Industries and Timber Producers Association. What is the difference between the two, and how do they collaborate together with you kind of managing both of them?
Sure. Well, the Minnesota Timber Producers Association really is made up of the men and the women and the families who work in the woods, and they're out or they're involved with the actual harvesting of trees, so loggers and truckers and people who haul timber, and sometimes wood brokers, if you will. So there are different types, and even some of the smaller mills and some of the smaller producers that way, even products like wood shims and other smaller products that you wouldn't think that are made in Minnesota. So the timber producers are really kind of the on the ground folks, if you will. And then on the other side of the equation, you've got Minnesota Forest Industries, and so those are the larger mills, the paper mills, and the siding plants, and the larger sawmills, if you will. And so I would say those are the people who work in the mills that we're representing there, who make the manufactured, the finished products that are taken to market, the products that benefit the world.
Mike, talk to us a little bit about the quality of the timber crop here in Minnesota.
Yeah, we're mostly an aspen or a pulpwood type of timber base in the state. There are other species, of course, as well. We have a very diverse forest in Minnesota, but really, historically, from an industrial standpoint, really you look back at some of the mills, and the Sappy Mill in Cloquet, the paper mill that everybody sees from I-35 as you drive on by, that mill's been there 120 years. And obviously they've made a lot of improvements and both environmentally and just manufacturing efficiency-wise too. But so and Blandon, UPM up in Grand Rapids has been there. These are long-standing industries, and up in International Falls, the paper mill in the Falls. And then, of course, you've got sawmills and whatnot too. Yeah. So there's just a rich heritage that's really utilized the forest as it grows in Minnesota.
Which brings up the question: are there any white pine forests left in Minnesota?
Oh, certainly. There's certainly a good chunk of pine trees. White pines struggled a little bit in the sense that because of disease and because of depredation, and deer love to chomp on the buds, when the trees get so high, and even rabbits and things like that. So white pine, to grow them, require a lot of care. And so if you're ever walking through a state forest or a forest that has a lot of white pine predominantly in it, you'll see in the fall of the year a lot of bud capping for those top buds because of depredation and whatnot. So there are a lot of factors that impact the trees in Minnesota that sometimes we don't even think about. And white pine is one of those that there's still a good number, and they're much more diverse, maybe not as many as we had 150 years ago in Minnesota, but still plenty of white pines across the vast amount of, we've got 17 million acres of forest land in Minnesota. And we're harvesting 1% of that forest land a year. So and it's important to regenerate those forests, and so I think that really from the standpoint of diversity, you see a diverse mix. There are certain areas just because of the soils that like to grow certain trees as well.
Mm-hmm. So much of the land in this region is government owned, federal, state, county.
Yep.
Is the relationship between the industry and these bodies of government pretty positive in terms of being able to get into this land and do some responsible forest management and logging?
Yeah, I think it's. I think in this role, coming in at this time, it's a time of optimism for lots of different reasons. I think we've seen. I think on the Superior National Forest, a federal. Managed federally by the U.S. Forest Service, I think we've seen something along the lines of a 14% growth in the volume of timber coming off that forest. And that's because of a great working relationship with the federal agencies and the industry and others, loggers and other stakeholders have worked at the state level to take advantage of the timber harvest there and increase that to an amount that's sustainable. I think the one thing about Minnesota, and the counties have been great. So I mean, all the various, and private landowners as well. And it's important to manage those forests sustainably. And I think that's maybe the best message of all is Minnesota's forests have been so sustainable and so resilient. And the people that work on the land, that work on the ground, they care as much about those forests as any of the rest of us, because there are generations of families who've worked in the woods over the years.
When you talk about sustainable forest management, what does that look like?
Yeah, so
forest?
It's diversity. It's also regeneration, because some trees regenerate from the stumps, if you will. Other areas you have to replant depending on the species or the desired condition. So sustainability means different things to different pieces of land as well, because some land is managed for older trees. We've got something to the effect of I think it's 60 million. I got to look here at my notes here. Ray Higgins from our office. It's 20 million more big trees than there were 60 years ago. So, we have more of those trees, 19 inches or in diameter or more. So, you can manage for different conditions, you can manage for different values, and you can still manage to harvest those trees, because, especially with aspen trees, they grow pretty fast.
So, Mike, why is it important for the Minnesota Timber Producers Association to exist?
Well, it's important for lots of different reasons. Number one, you think of good paying jobs, both in the woods and in the mills. And these are jobs, this is part of a legacy. For many of the families who've worked in the woods or worked in the mills, I talked about my grandfather, cutting trees back in the day and growing up in a small town. And it's important both for the resiliency, the sustainability of our forests, and the growth, the regeneration of our forests, but it's also important for those families who are also dependent on that natural resource.
Are you a lobbying group then too with the government?
Yeah, we advocate. We advocate at, certainly we work with the agencies. We work directly with the agencies, and then we do advocate, yes, mostly at the state level. There is some federal advocacy as well, and lobbying and whatnot. So yeah, we'll be down in St. Paul during the legislative session. We'll be pretty busy down there, I'm sure, and for lots of different reasons, because we want to help the DNR get what they need in this bonding session too.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific priorities that you have as an organization or organizations that you're bringing down to St. Paul?
Well, I think this year we're looking really primarily at bonding, at bonding and helping DNR with some of their requests. And then I think on the other front, we'll see what legislation really unfolds. Certainly energy policy is important to large power producers, and so that one I'm sure will be on the list of topics that we'll be wanting to talk to our local legislative leaders about too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is biomass still a big thing in the industry?
Well, biomass is certainly being discussed in different ways, shapes, and forms. The best use of biomass is when you use that bark and that residue, that kind of the unused portion of it. And many mills are already using biomass to generate power at their own facilities, if you will. So, but really, I think where we see it really being successful is in the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
With that, we have to run. Mike Birkeland, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Very much.